Welcome to another episode of the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater, people who stage manage and design and music direct, play instruments, are audio engineers or technical directors, all of the people who put in so much time, go unnoticed, and just work their butts off to make a live production happen. Today is my conversation with Brian Morgan. Brian is a trombonist, and we've worked together. We did a production of Cabaret, and I think Brian is one of the most consistent musicians I've ever had the pleasure of playing in a pit with. And so I love playing with people like that because they make you up your game, right? Like they inspire you to play better and to be more focused, because you don't want to one of the things that you don't want to be in the pit is the weakest link. And so there's always kind of not a competitiveness, but just a desire to not let others down. And when you're in the pit with someone like Brian and like so many other musicians that I've had the honor to play with, they can bring out just the best in you because you don't want to play worse than them. If you want to find out more about the people that I interview on this podcast, head on over to Facebook. I created a Facebook group called the Backstage Creative Podcast where I post people's websites or articles that they reference, or that's kind of where I put my show notes for the show. Yeah, head on over to that, and that's also where I post every week the new episode, so that way you also won't miss an episode. You can also subscribe to the podcast. That would be great. I would also love feedback. Leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. That also helps other people find the show, which I would really appreciate. And thank you for listening. I'm so grateful that people actually listen to this show, right? Like I'm sitting here at my kitchen table. It's a Monday morning and it sometimes feels weird that people are going to hear my ramblings. But it's also very humbling to know that people are listening to it and seem to like it as far as the feedback that I've gotten is concerned. So yeah, I appreciate you listening. Here we go. I'm excited to share this conversation with you. This is my conversation with Brian Morgan.
In March, I was on the road and I just came off it, and I've been stuck in Virginia for the last 7 months. And anyway, it's been wild, but you're right. Some stuff is coming back, but it's going to be weird in the winter when everything gets cold and people have to move inside. I don't know what's going to happen. So
Yeah, at least in the summer, a lot of organizations have done outdoor stuff, but that's going to be pretty much over soon, if not already. So
yeah.
Any idea when have they talked about trying to get tours up and going? I mean, I saw some stuff posted on Playville, jobs opening, but I don't know if those kind of panned out.
The latest I've heard is for tours is next fall. So a year from now, 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the latest news from Broadway League, I think, was June at the earliest. But it's also dependent on these unknowns, if when they're able to get a vaccine out and how quickly they're going to be able to produce, mass quantities. And then just the idea of getting people back into a theater, are people going to be, is the general public going to be willing to do that for a while? The people have to feel
Mm-hmm.
safe going in and seeing a show. So it's hard because you're in a theater, you're crammed next to everybody and everybody's shoulder to shoulder. And the performers, I mean, on stage, if you've ever seen a live show, you can watch the spit fly, right? When they're singing or acting and,
Yeah.
and in each other's face. And so there's protection regarding that. It's cool though. I've been in Richmond, and I have a friend of a friend in the Richmond Ballet here, and they've been doing shows, I guess, which has been interesting. I guess the performers wear masks, and they only sell 60 tickets out of a 280 seat theater or something like that. I don't know, and they've been doing classes. So it's some things are there. It's just all so dependent on the states as well. I guess with a tour, you have to think about bookings, which states are in what level of quarantine or openness, and that's always changing. Currently it's always changing, and so it seems like it's kind of an impossible task right now to schedule a tour, because the logistics already are so tight for a
Mhm.
normal touring schedule. It's got to be impossible to do it when there's all these moving pieces. So I don't know, that, like I said, the latest whisper in the wind, so to speak, is September 2021. So that's the best scenario I've heard so far, you know?
Yeah, and I wonder if they're thinking of sending out, like the normal number of tours or just doing like a few as kind of a test. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that ends up
Yeah.
looking.
I would imagine it just depends on what the producers, the people who finance the shows, are willing to put forward. If they're seeing a lot of risk in it, then maybe the belts tighten and less stuff goes out, or maybe they're ready to make money again. I don't know. The it's kind of boom or bust. It feels like with theater sometimes, especially on Broadway, but touring, especially like well-known shows, there's name value and that kind of thing. So it seems, I mean, I'm not an expert, right? Like,
Hmm.
but it seems like the risk is maybe a little bit less on a tour, but I'm not really sure. I've never dealt with budgets or anything like that. So we'll see.
Hmm.
It's all unknown at this point, right? So I don't know.
Yeah. Great. So, for people listening, you tour. it's so it'd be cool to hear your background, how you got into touring, where you're from, where you went to school, things like that, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So originally I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I don't know. I started playing the trombone in 6th grade. I had a friend who, like, my best friend was a year ahead of me. He told me I really should join band and play the saxophone. That was what he wanted me to play, of course. So, but I ended up on the trombone. Nobody else wanted to play it, and there was like a little voice in my head that just kind of told me to do it. So I did it, and it stuck with me really hard. From like, even at that early age, I knew I wanted to do it for like a long, forever, I guess. But went through like the typical American band system, or what I like to call the American band system. 60 kids, 40 kids, however big your school is, in a band room, and on, sort of lined up in these rows, and a director at the front, and that starts in 6th grade and goes. I took it all the way through college. I did want to mention just like a couple of the teachers I had early on. Dan Ogren, my middle school director, Walter Bates, my high school band director at Beaverton High School, was like a huge, I guess, just musical influence. And I'm realizing more of it as I get older. I just learned a lot from him. I had some private instructors, Dave Bryan and Ben Medler, who runs the Portland Youth Jazz Orchestra. He and his wife, Michelle, which I was a part of in high school. He's still like a mentor to me, and yeah. So I guess I had that kind of background in school. At least I just really loved it. It's like the subject that really caught my attention. I just couldn't get enough of it, just playing trombone and being in band, and I guess like I was, for a middle schooler and a high schooler, like, good at it. I just really liked doing it, and I started doing like little gigs as a teenager here and there, just at a church for Easter, or I used to do these dance band, like big band gigs at senior centers in Beaverton. um, I had it was another like band director. He was my 8th grade band director, Mr. Eastman, I think was his name. He like helped run an old fogey big band, just a bunch of old retired guys like playing swing music from the 40s, and we'd show up to the senior center on a weekend, and there's like I don't know, like a little room with a dance floor, like reasonably sized dance floor, but that was it, and a stage. It reminded me of like I think the senior center used to be an elementary school or something like that, so it reminded me of like elementary music classroom. Anyway, there was a little stage and a dance floor, and I'd show up and there'd be these, I'd get like trombone 3. There'd be a big fat book about 6 inches thick of charts. I really liked playing jazz. I still like playing jazz, and I'd, they'd have a set list, and you'd pull out all the sheets and put together your set 1 and set 2, and then just spend like the next like 2 hours sight reading music, and it was a blast. Like, loved doing it. But I kind of took that sort of experience and the experience in the youth jazz orchestra, took that to college, spent some time in college in the music department, struggling really hard. I'm not the best of students, but anyway, just the main thing I liked to do in school was playing the ensembles, and ended up back in Portland, and after school, and played in some local bands. And I was kind of moving a lot at the time. I was about 25 or so, 25 or 26, and I was moving a lot. Anyway, I decided, I was out of work. I'd been working in retail, and I had taken like, I just quit. I was tired of doing like other things other than music. So I tried to get into teaching privately and playing locally, and I was moving too much to really build up that, like a reputation anywhere, and or any sort of studio. And I'd been out of work for like a year, and feeling pretty down, I guess. So I just decided one day to send in a resume to, I knew you could get jobs on cruise ships as a musician. I think I had done an audition or two a few years before and hadn't landed anything. So on a whim, I sent out my resume and some examples of my playing to like 3 or 4 agents. There's these companies that'll hire musicians and musical acts out to the cruise lines. I sent that out in the morning, and I went into my garage to clean out my car. It was like filthy, right? And it was just one of those, I got to clean out the car, in there with a vacuum, just, and like trash bags and total rat's nest. And I think it was a phone call. Maybe it was an email. I can't remember, but I was contacted like a couple hours later after sending these resumes out to these agents. I got a contact from one of them saying, "Hey, do you have a passport, and are you willing to leave for Australia tomorrow?" I was like, I guess, you know. They said, "Okay, great. Can you do an audition today?" And I said, "Okay, sure. What do I need to do?" And he said, "You need a landline phone." And this is like 2012 or something. So like landline phones are already quickly becoming a thing of the past. He said, "You need a landline phone and a computer and a printer, and you're going to do an audition over the phone." So my ex at the time worked at a school, and we went to her office, and like they sent me a bunch of music about an hour before the audition. I don't know, 5 or 6 songs, just sheet music. And I had an hour to like look them over and prepare. And then I used her office phone to call this number, and this guy just listened to me play trombone over the phone, which just seems silly at the time. I don't know, but anyway, that's sort of like the thing they do, I guess. And he said, I got to the, I thought it went really well. Like I nailed it. Well, I don't think, like, I know I nailed it, and I'm thinking, great. Like I was awesome. I wasn't nervous. Like all this, I'm gonna get the job. And he, we get to the end of the interview, and he's like, "Well, Brian, thanks so much for playing. I just don't think, you're quite ready for this." I'm thinking like, what?
Oh.
you know? And he goes, "Nah, man, I'm just kidding. Like, you got the job." Like, um, but it ended up, I didn't even have to leave for Australia, which is a good thing, the next day, because like I definitely wasn't prepared. I ended up having to wait like 6 months for my contract. So it was like another 6 months of no work, and moving again. But I had, at least at that point, I had a job, and I went out with Celebrity Cruises in like the fall on like a 2,500 passenger ship, and had a blast. I did that for like 2.5 or 3 years. Cruise ships. Worked with 4 different companies. Spent a lot of time just on the sea, traveling the world, making a lot of really close friends, playing a lot of different shows and music, and just meet in general, like just meeting a lot of people. And it was really a great experience to like get out of the country and see the world. It's a great way to do it, but it does get tiresome. It's like a lifestyle that I don't know, is some people can do it for a long time, but it's not the most sustainable sort of lifestyle. It's sort of, a lot of late nights and drinking and, I mean, having a good time and seeing awesome stuff, but you live in a tiny room with a roommate and there's no windows, and sometimes the choice of food isn't so good from the mess, and after a while you realize there's kind of a limit, or an artistic ceiling, I guess is a way to put it,
Mm-hmm.
within that industry, that you end up doing a lot of the shows, especially when you're working in the theater on the ship. A lot of the shows end up being really similar, and most of the bands aboard ships use the same dance charts for the lounge sets, and artistically it's kind of limiting. So after that, I went to New York City, spent a few years there with the intent to, I don't know, just test out the scene there. It's one of those meccas for art, and music. But I didn't work a lot in the city. It's hard. One of the things I heard was it takes 7 years is like the average amount of time to sort of break in to some sort of steady work there.
Oh.
Which is, I don't know how true that is. Like, I think it probably just varies person to person, but I did a lot of, like, I worked as a dog walker, walking rich people's dogs in Central Park, and I did some fun stuff musically in the city. I played with an Afrobeat band, Revolutionary Council Afrobeat, my friend Angel, and again, it was another place to just like meet a lot of people who have similar ambitions and are in a similar place in their life, and who are just like interesting people. You make some good connections, and some friendships that you come away with from that sort of environment. But wasn't making a lot of money as a musician, which I think if you're getting into music to make money, it's like definitely the wrong reason, because you're going to be really disappointed. But it is something that I know people do for a living, and like I said earlier, I think I kind of knew at an early age it's something I wanted to try, but it wasn't progressing as quickly as I guess I needed it to. I was doing some other work outside of the city, more regionally up in New Hampshire, like I did the Palace with you, and before that I played at the Winnipesaukee Playhouse for High Society, Cole Porter. Still looking for sort of that next step, I guess. I sort of went back to the resume thing and put together a few videos and sent out, was checking, the playbill.com and some of the websites, and I had sent in with a couple music coordinators, the guys who hire the pit orchestras for tours. And eventually, I think I must have applied with this particular recruiter or a coordinator 2 or 3 times. But, I guess the way it kind of works in the business is people have a circle like of musicians and that they're comfortable working with to hire. They're comfortable enough to hire. It's either full, or they either don't, it's full up, or they have a need for a job that they need to fill, and so they have to add somebody new. So there's opportunities that sort of pop up periodically with some of these music coordinators. So I was just kind of ready for the opportunity, and I put in my resume and my reel at the right time and got an email. That's a funny story too, because I got this email. It was for Elf the Musical. That was the first tour I did. The email with the job offer was addressed to somebody else. Like, and like, how do I respond to this email? Like, I spent like, I think 15 or 20 minutes thinking like, what the hell do I do?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to accept somebody else's job offer. Like, and then I got an email like 15 minutes later that was like the the text of the email was Brian. It's like, okay, so yes, I will take that job. So that's where I ended up, where I'm at now, or where I was at before everything shut down. I'm hoping to continue with that. I think like the key in my mind has always been like perform, like play, take jobs, like play, just get out there and play with people as at a professional level. And sometimes the gig is professional and you're really happy with it, and other times it's less than professional and it's kind of a bummer, but you usually end up making a connection that leads somewhere down the road, So, and at the very least, you gain experience, which is sort of, I know that's like a common like joke between musicians, being offered experience and exposure, but like for a while when you're starting out, like you just have to get out there and create these relationships, these musical relationships, and get to a point where the right people trust you to do a job. And hopefully when this ends in 2021 or whenever, that things will pick up back where they were. But one of the frustrating things for me throughout the spring and summer is just thinking like, man, I spent like a decade just like working up to this moment, and now like it's everything because of circumstances out of my control. Everything is just stopped, and I don't know what it's, am I going to have to start over again, so because I you feel like the ball is rolling finally, downhill or uphill, I guess, I don't know. Whatever the metaphor is, but um there was some momentum and it just came to this screeching halt, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now, which is frustrating. But whatever the case is, like I'm just gonna go back to doing what I was doing. I mean, I think that's what has to be done, So anyway, that's where I'm at now. Just kind of we're all on pause right now.
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard that sentiment echoed through so many people I've talked to. Just yeah, and I feel the same. Of like, oh, I've worked 10 years, to get going, and then in the span of like 2 weeks, it was like cancellation email after cancellation email, and it's like, wow, like that came crashing down really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I like to talk to people about like building a network and what has worked for you, and some things maybe that haven't worked, because it is really hard, especially if you're in a town where you didn't go to college there. I think it's really hard to start making those connections, and even
Mhm.
get gigs where you don't get paid. So what things have you tried that have worked to get gigs, and what things have you tried that maybe haven't been successful?
I think the big thing, like I was saying earlier, is like music relationships. So much of the business is built around being in at the front of the line in somebody's head when they have a job and they need, in my case, a trombonist, being the first one or one of the first that they think of. What's worked for me has been just putting myself out there, at least thinking about it now, like opportunities like normal people have where there's like a job listing and you apply and then there's an interview. It's so rare in the musical world where that's the case. I know like there are jobs where people audition, especially if like you're someone who's trying to break into a symphony orchestra. There's if you want to play at Rockefeller Center Orchestra, you have to audition for that. So there's stuff like that. But I think for most people, like their careers are built on personal relationships,
Mm-hmm.
getting out there and doing the gigs that aren't going to lead anywhere career wise. Like usually you can find a relationship within that with somebody that you work with, that you like the way they play, you enjoy being around them, or you really like working with them. They're easy to work with, and they remember you being patient, just generally being patient. There's so much patience that comes with the job, with the career. But just getting out, meeting people, a lot of it's tied within social circles. So figuring out how to meet more people who do what you do, and people who play the instrument you do, because that's another way. Like, people need subs, or they can't do a job, they can't play a gig, they're busy, they're already booked, whatever it is. So they recommend you, and I think that happens in theater a lot. At least that, in my experience so far, you often get recommended. So making relationships with people that play the instrument that you do, or play in the field that you're trying to get into, is really important as well. And you can do that different ways. Just being friendly with the people you work with. A lot of times you end up with good friends. And I know, working at the Palace, I made some great friends, and playing in the Afrobeat band in New York, made some great friends. And spots here and there, you never know when you're going to meet somebody who's going to help you get work. So being friendly, talking to people, listening, and then playing for people can really help you as well. I think that's how I got started early on. It was just like, playing for whatever it was, the the dance band at the senior center. Like, that leads to an opportunity at a church down the road, and that experience, that's useful experience for like the next gig that you get in college, right? And people who hire musicians are looking for experience. They're looking for somebody who's going to be able to show up and perform the music to the level that they need it performed. And the way you get jobs is by having people trust you to do that. So there's
Mm-hmm.
it's tough to say like there's one method, or it sort of all comes together. And I think having a resume listing your experience, and then having, it's really important that if they don't know you, they need to hear you or see you play, see you and hear you play. So having like a reel, like I used applying for these tours, I have a YouTube page. I would just send them links. I used to record myself on the cruise ships when I was working on cruise ships with my cell phone, just set it up on the stand midway through a show, and try and capture like a segment of the music that I knew was like interesting to a listener, and maybe particularly challenging, or at least shows some sort of musicality. That's the sort of thing you want to capture within that sort of video, and then put it up and have it ready to send out. These jobs that come up on websites like playbill.com, I don't know for certain, but I would imagine that they get a lot of applicants. And so just like checking for listings regularly. I still check, like today, I checked in the morning when I got up, and I'll probably check, before I go to bed, or yeah, I'll for sure check tomorrow, playbill.com. Even though I know everything's shut down, you just never know when the opportunity's going to present itself. So being prepared with material to send to somebody, and being like the first one through the electronic door, like, is, I think, really important. So having like a clean looking resume with your playing experience, and some video examples that are easy to access, like YouTube or a website, whatever it is, that you can just send them a link. Hey, my name's Ryan. Here's my resume. I'm really interested. Maybe they look at the resume, but you give them a link to some examples of your playing, and they can quickly click on that and get, a 5-minute impression of who you are as a player. So, and then they can look at the resume and say, okay, he's done this and this, he's clearly been employed this sort of like work before, you know so I can likely trust him to fulfill a contract. I think the toughest part is putting that all together. So you just have to do as much as possible to start, to fill in that experience gap between you and the next person sending in their material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, like being ready for when things come up, because you don't know. And if sometimes there's times in your calendar where you don't have anything And so then I mean, I have a tendency to do this. I get kind of lazy and I don't play bass as much, but then it seems like something will always kind of randomly come up like the next day and you're like, oh no, like I don't know if I'm quite ready for that. But
Yeah.
yeah, kind of always keeping your skill up and, keeping your materials updated.
Yeah, definitely. Being prepared. I had a teacher early on, Thera Memory, who's another Portland-based musician, or was. He sadly passed away a few years ago. But I was in I did like a summer camp where he was one of the instructors, and played in an after-school jazz program with him my senior year of high school, and he used to harp professionalism all the time, like being prepared for the gig. You just never know when your opportunity is going to come up, and you just have to be ready in the moment to be musical, which isn't easy, but you have to be prepared, and then you have to be able to follow through with the job, which is, I guess, the second part of the equation, but that's a different story. But yeah, just preparation and being ready to like go, hey, do you want to be on a plane to Australia tomorrow? Like, I guess so. Yeah, I do. Like, it's worth it. It is worth it in the end. So
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about touring, and this will probably be a really big, wide question. So take it whichever way you want. Was there anything about touring that was maybe unexpected?
with the cruise ships, I talked to some people who'd done that sort of job before. I knew a little bit about what it was going to be. It wasn't too unexpected. I guess the type of people that you're going to meet can really vary, and like they can be from all over the world, well, especially on cruise ships. Sometimes like you're going to be put in a situation where like somebody isn't holding up their end of the deal, which is kind of disappointing when you get there, but I think that's just like every job ever,
Yeah.
so, but you think, oh well, they all had to audition like me, so they should all be ready to. Well, no, like some of them work through different agents, and some of them have never played certain styles of music, and you just never know. There wasn't too much that surprised me, I guess, for cruise ships touring. I don't know, there wasn't a lot that surprised me. I guess there's a lot that just takes getting used to. You sort of realize that like not everybody's willing or able to sort of adapt. One of my strengths is being able to fit in, like as a musician and as a person. Like I'm not like a super outgoing person, a bit of an introvert, but just being able to like kind of go with the flow of things, like go with the moment, is something that's really important to touring, to any sort of like traveling job, I would think. But in my case, it's playing music. You just never know what you're going to get. So there's lots of little surprises, and you have to be prepared. You never know when you're going to work on a cruise ship, when you're going to have a fly on act get aboard and they're just a total jerk. You never know when you're going to be pleasantly surprised. One of the biggest surprises is and maybe this is applicable in other industries as well, but like how little people know what they're doing on at the top end of things. Like I remember getting aboard the Regent Seven Seas Navigator. It was a totally new band. Nobody had ever met anybody. We were going to be on the ship for 6 months, and we got aboard. There was no music for us to play.
Oh
They
no.
pieced us together, 7 of us, from like the Ukraine, from Poland, from the UK, from like different parts of the United States. And we get aboard, and they're like, this is a tiny ship, by the way, 300 passengers. There's only one band, full band on board. There's a couple like solo artists, but there's one band, and which means we have to play in the theater, we have to play in the lounges for the parties. And we get on board, and they tell the music director, "Yeah, great, welcome aboard. We have Motown night tonight." And the MD said, "Cool. Where do you store the music?" "Oh, what music?"
Oh no.
you know, we had to play
Oh.
like an hour and a half set, and two of the rhythm section players had never listened to Motown. They could sight read, but you know, so that was a surprise, I guess. um, there's a lot, so there's just a lot of little surprises. You just have to be prepared for anything and just go with the flow and not get caught up on the little things that have gone wrong. Like, what's the saying? Like, the show must go on, right? Like, I've worked with so many people who they just break down. They're like, this sucks, and they have a temper tantrum, and I mean, eventually, like, show goes out and everything works out fine. And but I've always sort of thought, like, why are you making this worse? Just little surprises. There's nothing that getting on board with these tours or with the cruise ships that like sticks out as like, whoa, I really didn't expect that. I had a fairly good idea going in. You're on the road a lot. I knew that. You're almost always rooming with somebody. I knew that as well. I knew, especially like the Broadway shows, I knew it was going to be the same show night after night. And I guess I was ready for like the main bullet points of touring, but there's always like little stuff that sort of jumps out and you're like, usually it's the way people act. You always just get people like I think touring breaks people down mentally pretty quickly who aren't sort of prepared for that randomness. I mean, I've seen a couple people just have mental breakdowns. We had a guy on a tour have a mental breakdown in the hotel lobby and left that day. Like, he just got fired and left that day. So there's surprises like that, but nothing major, like going into it, you kind of know what you're in for. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially as musicians, we're not necessarily called to be like leaders that this may sound bad, but like leaders that solve problems. Like, our job is to play our instrument
yeah,
and to do it well.
exactly. Yeah, definitely. And honestly, like, that's what I love about the job. Like, I get my corner of the pit,
Mm-hmm.
and on these shows, I get my own monitor, and I set my levels, and I have my own book, and like, I just love being a part of like the big picture. And I don't under sometimes I don't understand, like, I know that's not for everybody. Some people really need room to stretch out creatively, and so it just doesn't end up being for them. But for me, like you said, you have your part, and you have to do it well every night. And I just kind of love that challenge. Like, maybe it's not challenging, but to me, like, I've made it a mental challenge. Like, this is the same show I played 60 times already, and I have another 60 times to go, and I've never gotten it perfect. So tonight we're going to try and get it perfect. And to me, that's always fun. I've just always enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I think um, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because you're one of the most consistent players I've ever played with.
Oh, thank you.
Besides, the challenge of wanting to play it perfect, do you have any pre-show routine, or something that helps you kind of get into the mind space of performing?
The last few years, like, just been trying to consistently warm up and sort of like create a routine, I guess. I don't do meditation or anything like that, but part of warming up is meditation in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and just like falling in love with the horn again, every night. You just have to do that. And part of that's just like getting it warmed up and getting your lips going and getting your air going. And so I've been trying to be more like really, really consistent with that process. And it's hard on the road sometimes because you're rolling into town, like they're still setting up the pit, and you have to get your things into a hotel and then get back on the bus. And somewhere in between all that, between that and the show, you have like a couple hours. You have to do a sound check, and you have to eat, so it doesn't always work out. But usually when I have the time, which is most of the time, I try and get in early when it's quiet. I like getting in before other people, before the other musicians get in, and doing long tones, doing some lip slurs, just getting myself like mentally and physically warmed up, and remembering how to play the trombone, and then putting it down, walking out and just chatting with people, like getting, hanging out with your bandmates. That's like the best part about playing music, is like hanging out with other musicians. So, I don't try and sweat it too much, like the preparation part. I just try and get in early when it's quiet, and warm up, get like I said, the air going and the horn going, and then just try and like enjoy each show. After a while, like the last show I did before we got shut down, we hit our 100 show mark. And after 30 shows, it usually just it does become a bit of a routine, and maybe it loses some of its luster. Just like there's nothing like opening night for any show when you first go out and perform it for people, for an audience, and you hear the crowd noise. But yeah, preparation wise, just trying to find that quiet moment, especially on the road, can be hard, but getting in early usually does the trick. And it's funny, you find people like sort of following along as well. Like I think it's probably more common for musicians. We all sort of like to do that, get in and just like get going. And part of that is just part of playing the horn is mental as well as physical. So brass instruments are can be very physical instruments, but more importantly, just like remembering how to breathe, like how do I take my breath? How am I setting my lips? Where's my tongue? When I'm articulating, that kind of thing. So just taking some quiet time, usually like an hour, sometimes an hour and a half before the show. Usually like hour and a half before the show if I can. Get in, get the instrument out, get it oiled, play some long tones, warm up for like 30 minutes and 30 maybe 45 minutes if I'm feeling really good, and then put it down and go hang out with your friends, backstage. It's a lot of fun just like being around the crowd backstage, and I think that helps loosen you up mentally as well. So
Yeah, I've gone through phases where I am really diligent warming up before a show, and phases where I get kind of arrogant and think, oh, I've played this, I've played bass for 15 years, I'm fine. But
mm-hmm,
the shows where I've noticed like the shows where you're really diligent to warm up, and, like, for bass players, like posture, I mean, for you guys too, I guess, but like posture and being aware of like how you're holding your shoulders and your back, and just taking that time beforehand to notice the small things
mm-hmm,
helps your longevity, because then you don't have like back pain and whatnot. But it
yeah,
also, you're just more picky during the show. Like you're more diligent to, like, your
mm-hmm.
standard is higher, or at least for me when I've like warmed up and thought about that, rather than just going in with, oh, like my part's easy, I'll be fine.
Yeah, it's like a checklist, right? You just sort of you go down the checklist and like, is this working? Yeah, is this working? No, let me fix it, and what's working? Is today going to be difficult? Is it going to be easy? Like some nights are really hard. Like
Mhm.
you get in last minute, they haven't set up everything. Like the crew's had an awful time, and the load-in's been maybe maybe they had like a tiny like door or something to get the equipment through, and or they're only able to fit one truck in at a time. Some we play at some small theaters, and so they're still setting up sometimes they're still setting up the pit. They don't have the mics out yet. Like everybody's in a rush. They're all pissed off. Like the crew's been up since 6:30 in the morning. Like, and they're not gonna go to sleep for the one if it's a one nighter until like 3 a.m. So there's a lot of like anger and frustration, like, and you've been on a bus for 8 hours, sitting shoulder to shoulder with somebody, and you had McDonald's for lunch, and there's nothing else to do on a bus, so you've been snacking and you're kind of feeling a little, and you get in and you're thinking about dinner, but you get into the hotel room and then you're back on the bus and you go, or maybe you're able to walk to the theater, and they're like, no, you can't go in the pit yet, like it's not ready, people are working in there. And so you, okay, and then it's like, okay, I gotta guess I should go find dinner because I'm not going to be able to eat until 11 o'clock when the show's done. And so you go and eat dinner, and then you come back and they're like, okay, like, we're ready, we're going to do sound check, we're 30 minutes behind, go. And you haven't touched the horn at all. So sometimes it's going to be a weird day, and stressful, and you just know you're not going to have the best performance, but you do the best you can and learn to live with it, so but most of the time I've been lucky to be able to do shows where we've had one nighters and we've also had like weeks where we sit down and play at the same place for a week. So you do what you can with the time that you have. Sometimes you just pull the horn out, and I like travel with a practice mute. So if they're not ready for like sound, like a loud brass instrument playing while they're setting up, or there's no room in the pit yet or whatever, like I can usually pull the instrument out of like the equipment box and pull it out, put the mute in, buzz backstairs, backstage or in the stairwell or in the green room or wherever it is. You just try and make the most of it. And but there is like you were saying, like this sort of mental checklist, and you go down it, and some nights, like you're really in for it, and other nights you feel pretty good. So it all works out in the end.
Yeah, and even when it's not going well, or the the sound guy's terrible, or something is really frustrating, like, I mean, you still get to play your instrument, like,
Yeah.
it's
I mean, I would just like to say, I've never met a terrible sound. I'm just putting this out there. Never met a terrible sound person. For any sound person I've ever like will work with or have worked with in the past or future, you're all great. I love you. Please make me sound good. Thank you. Okay.
I've met some really terrible sound people, but
Yeah, me too. Oh,
anyway, that's a whole
that's
nother
the Pandora's box
can of worms.
we don't
Yeah.
need to open.
Awesome. So the last question that I like to ask everyone who comes on is, advice to young people, young musicians who want to, specifically young musicians who want to get into theater.
Well, we sort of talked about earlier, just being prepared, having patience. Like it just takes, I think it's rare that people jump straight in to steady work. School, like getting a music degree, is good if you're ready for school. I was not ready. I don't have my degree. I don't plan on getting it, maybe in something else. But, I think school works for some people. It doesn't work for others. But it is a
Hmm.
good way to build those relationships that we were talking about earlier. Like a lot of times your professors or people who play professionally, or especially if you go to school in New York, you can get a leg up that way. But just being patient, being prepared, just believe in what you do, because there's going to be a lot of people who like tell you, hey, like, have you ever thought of doing something else, or you should do something else, or you tell them, they ask you what you do, you tell them you're professional trombonist, and they're like, yeah, but what do you do? Like I used to get that question so much when I was starting out, and it's really really hard, but you just have to like keep dreaming, keep believing, in yourself and what you can do, and staying, even when you're not working, staying on the horn. Just, you should always be learning as a musician. Even most professionals like would agree to this, that they're still like constantly learning, about the horn or about themselves or about music or whatever. So just being ready to like take in new information, and new experiences, and learn from them. Being versatile is really important for what I do, because for theater, because
Hmm.
some of these shows can switch from funk to swing jazz to classical in like 3 songs or in 1 song. So like just being ready to play any sort of style, which means more having experience in those styles. So get out there and like play in a rock band, play, in an Afrobeat ensemble, play in a community orchestra. Like you should always be improving upon your skill set, right? Because I promise you it will pay off in the future. Being prepared, showing up to the gig as prepared as possible. Like some gigs you have to show up and be able to sight read, right? Like there's some jobs that you're going to find where that's a thing. So like that's a tough one to prepare for, but if you can like be on the lookout for etude books and exercise books and just practice sight reading, like that'll help. And taking as many of those gigs as possible where they're like sight reading gigs, that's going to help experience wise. It's going to help you prepare for stuff like that in the future. But also, like if you get a book for a show ahead of time, like prepare it, look through it, and then show up with everything you need, with 3 pencils, with a tuner, and like show up early. Like that's another big thing that my band director, Mr. Bates, used to say all the time. It's a really common saying, like, to be early is to be on time, to be on time is to be late, and to be late is unforgivable, and that's really true in this business, because like, if you're showing up late to shows or even rehearsals, like people remember that. It's going to bite you in the butt in the future. So like just being prepared, giving yourself enough time to get to the venue, like just the little stuff, being the things that like sort of stand out as professionalism, like being prepared for that. The last thing I would say is finding love in the work that you do. So whatever it is, whatever the show is, whatever the ensemble is, the style, like whatever it is, remind yourself like you love doing this. It is worth it. Being able to fall in love with your instrument every night, like for me, it started in 6th grade. Like I loved playing the trombone, and like that's what's kept me in it this long, through all like the hard stuff and all the doubt, the self-doubt, and the doubt that comes from outside, from other people. Is just like, I love doing this. I don't want to stop doing this. So just, if you want to make music a profession, you really have to love playing music, and you have to remember that you love playing music, because there's going to be times when it's, when you're broke, and it's easy to forget that. So that'd probably be the last thing that I would say, is like, find love within your work, within your job.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.